Hello and welcome to StratNews Global. I'm Surya Gangadharan. Is the world nuclear order crumbling? Are the dangers posed by nuclear weapons to India greater than ever before? I have with me Manpreet Sethi, a well-known scholar on nuclear and strategic issues, and she's with the Center for Air Power Studies. She's been there for many years. Manpreet Sethi, welcome and thank you. So, is the nuclear order crumbling, the one that we've known for so many years? Is it in danger of breaking down completely?
Thank you, first of all, for having me here. No, I don't think the nuclear order is in danger of breaking down completely, but certainly the contours are going to change. The situation is going to be very different from what we've been used to during the Cold War period. That's when the nuclear order was crafted. But given that if that order had just two major nuclear superpowers, and that dyad relationship was what was shaping everything else in the world. In today's times, you've got 9 nuclear armed states and very many permutations and combinations of the nuclear dyads. And since all of them are in stressed situations, certainly the nuclear order is not going to be the same as it was in the past.
Mm-hmm. So does that increase the risks for, say, a country like India?
The risks increase, I think, for everyone. It's not just for India. But the nuclear risks, I think, are increasing for many reasons. But more than that, it is about, earlier we used to talk about nuclear risks only in terms of nuclear war breaking out and a deliberate nuclear war between two nuclear armed states. Today, I don't think we talk so much about deliberate nuclear war. The risks are increasing about the inadvertent escalation happening, about countries stumbling into nuclear war because of misperceptions, because of miscalculations. So you could just run into a nuclear war because of the other conflict situations, because of stressed, trust deficits between states. All of that could lead us in that direction. And the other major thing, which is, I think, intersecting with nuclear deterrence in new ways, are new technologies. Emerging technologies which no one really understands how are they going to impact nuclear deterrence. There are no controls on these technologies. In fact, the nuclear arms control architecture that existed is, as you said, crumbling. And as a result of that, with no new technologies coming under any kind of regulated control, that's where the dangers are increasing about your stumbling into nuclear war. And a very good judge of how close we are to nuclear risks, or how high we are on nuclear risks, is this clock face that the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists brings out every year to indicate the hand of minutes, how close or far is it from 12 o'clock. 12 o'clock being, nuclear doomsday. And they've brought it down to 100 seconds to midnight this year in January. Which is the closest the world has ever been to that 12 o'clock.
So, okay, trust deficit you mentioned, we all know what that means, especially India, China, India, Pakistan context. You mentioned technologies. What are these technologies?
So some of the new technologies which are coming in are, for instance, hypersonic missiles. Ballistic missiles, ICBM variety, have been hypersonic in the boost phase and then in the terminal phase. But the rest of the trajectory of the missile has been predictable and it has been not hypersonic. What we are talking about today are hypersonic glide vehicles and hypersonic cruise missiles, which will remain hypersonic, which means between 5 Mach and 40 Mach. They will remain hypersonic throughout the course of their trajectory. And they will be highly maneuverable as well. So when you do speed with maneuverability, that's a hypersonic missile. And that will make things very difficult because these hypersonic missiles could be either nuclear tipped or they could be conventionally tipped, or they might not be tipped at all with a kinetic warhead. So just the force of the speed will create the damage. And since they could come and hit your nuclear targets, you don't know what that missile is carrying and where it's going to come. So there's a destination ambiguity and there is a warhead ambiguity with a hypersonic missile. That's where the dangers are going to come in because countries can't predict what is going to happen, which, as I said, will lead you into situations where you could stumble into a nuclear war of inadvertent escalation because you are unaware of where it's going to come and hit you. Secondly, artificial intelligence and machine learning coming into your nuclear command and control. Now, countries are talking about it largely to enhance deterrence by suggesting that nobody can get away with nuclear use because there is going to be a automatic use that will happen, retaliation that will happen. But with artificial intelligence entering nuclear command and control, with no man in the loop, we don't know what will happen with machine learning and what can go wrong. The third dimension is cyber offensives. So cyber attacks on nuclear command and control can again push countries into lowering their alert levels to suggest to the other side that the moment you do a cyber attack on my command and control, there is going to be nuclear launch that will happen from this side. So you're actually lowering alert levels at all points, and therefore increasing the risks of getting into a situation that you don't want to get into. So the earlier period had this clear distinction between conventional and nuclear. Now you see blurring of lines with new technologies, and that's where I think the dangers are coming in.
So when you look at, say, China and Pakistan, where we see our major threats emanating from, are they already into those technologies?
China is certainly working on hypersonic capabilities. Their threat perception is the American missile defense. And if they have to be able to penetrate American missile defense and strengthen their deterrence, then for them, hypersonic missiles make sense. And they have demonstrated in their last military parade in October 2019, the DF-17, which is a hypersonic missile. All of this is being done to build credibility of their deterrence. So China is certainly in this field. And given our past experience of Chinese technology normally filtering into Pakistan at some point or the other, that theoretical possibility is always there that technology will come into Pakistan as well. MIRVed missiles, for instance, which is on one missile, you have multiple warheads. So this MIRV technology is deployed by China now. And Pakistan has undertaken one test of a missile, which is a MIRVed warhead. So these technologies are in our region. And we have to understand how deterrence will work out with them.
So is it time to look at our no first use posture? Should we revise that doctrine?
In fact, I find our doctrine is perhaps the most stabilizing element that will help us to keep our focus and not get swayed by these technology developments that are happening outside. See, we have to make our choices carefully on what kind of capability that we want. As per our doctrine, and I think it's given us very sound principles to stand on, one is credible minimum deterrence and the other is no first use. So credible minimum deterrence is giving you the guidance to say that your technology buildup has to be at the minimum level, which is credible to the adversary to cause unacceptable damage. So it is keeping you away from the chances of increasing numbers senselessly. And getting into a numbers game. Nuclear weapons is not about numbers. It's about your ability to do unacceptable damage. And given the nature of the weapon, it's not very difficult to do unacceptable damage, especially in our region, which has such a high density of population. So it's keeping us away from that. The second principle is no first use. And I think no first use is giving you that ability of letting the adversary not be on the edge. And that's a good idea with nuclear weapons, because the closer he is to the trigger, the more he's, edgy and wants to use the trigger because he's nervous about your using it first. You're keeping him away from that. And that's the purpose of our nuclear weapons, which is that the weapon should not come into use. So no first use is actually a stabilizing doctrine. In today's times, when the other side has second strike capability, your first use of the weapon is never going to give you any benefit. Even in monopoly situations, countries have desisted from using nuclear weapons. Certainly in our context, where Pakistan and China have such a large arsenal, nuclear weapons, using them first will never bring us any advantages. So therefore, having a no first use has kept us away from certain kinds of technology builds up, like going in for counter force technologies, which are expensive, having very high quality of ISR or early warning, not wanting to have missile defense, because then you would want to use first and then protect yourself through a missile defense. So for having a credible first use strategy, your capability requirements are extremely high.
But we are going in for missile defense. The DRDO is developing something. We've got this S-400. There's some talk of an American system also.
So yes, India has done a few successful intercepts to showcase a capability of missile defense. I think that will only be at a very small level. It'll be rudimentary, and it'll largely be for protection of our NFU, so that you can protect your retaliatory assets in order to convey to the other side that retaliation will be certain, it'll be assured, and that's your deterrence strategy. So your BMD is essentially for instance, command and control or some silos, etc. I don't think missile defense for a city or for a country the size of India, the number of people that we have here, will ever be an effective option. So for me, instead of ballistic missile defense, deterrence has to be the way to go with nuclear weapons. A certain amount of missile defense, of course, as I said, for your retaliatory assets will be necessary, and you have to build it in that sense. The S-400 is largely air defense, and what India is now talking about with the American system is also largely air defense. There will be a rudimentary missile defense that will only be at the terminal stage. But India is not looking at ballistic missile defense the way the US is looking, which is higher and higher up interception or boost phase interception. I think those are self-defeating capabilities that India must need not invest in it, because there's an opportunity cost of every investment, and you would rather put your money on increasing survivability of your arsenal in order to signal deterrence credibility.
So do you think we now have the kind of missiles with the kind of ranges and those kind of capabilities that are necessary to convey deterrence?
Certainly in the case of Pakistan, I don't think there is any problem. In the case of China, till we get our Agni 5 operationally deployed, one could say that it's work in progress. But certainly once we have Agni 5 deployed in sufficient enough numbers, that's credible deterrence against China.
And do you think this whole idea of sea-based deterrence is more sustainable in the long term?
Sea-based deterrence is sustainable in the long term. We have to, because that's the most survivable leg of the triad.
Yeah.
So that's which is giving you the maximum amount of confidence about your no first use, that no use of the nuclear weapon, the adversary will be able to get away with it, because there will always be the sea leg undetected available to carry out retaliation. It is an expensive game to get into, but then again, given our neighborhood, we don't have to get into very large numbers. I think 4 or 5, so that 2 or 3 are on active patrolling at all times, is what we will be perhaps looking at. And again, the ranges of your submarine launched ballistic missiles are going to be critical. So India has already demonstrated, I think, 2,500 kilometers. As Agni 5 becomes operational, I think we will move into perhaps 3,400 kind of capability, which should be sufficient to signal deterrence to both sides.
This whole idea about us absorbing a first strike, it's kind of, is it politically for any government to say?
It sounds counterintuitive, and I think it sounds politically incorrect for the country to say that, we will take a strike before we hit back. But no first use is not about taking the strike. No first use is about not letting the first strike happen.
Okay.
That's your deterrence strategy, that the nuclear weapon should not come into play. And that's the signaling that, must focus on to ensure that the first breakdown doesn't happen. Okay. So no first use is about that. No first use is about exuding that confidence in your capability, that the moment you use your nuclear weapons, there's hell to pay for it. And that's the signal that's going out with no first use. Deterrence is a mind game. Nuclear weapons is completely a psychological exercise. One doesn't expect that weapon to come into play, because deterrence breakdown is a different field altogether.
Nightmare.
So for deterrence to hold, it's your signaling, it's your playing with the adversary's mind. All of that is extremely important. And as a deterrence strategy, India's nuclear doctrine is excellent.
So you think we have played this deterrence game well? We've conveyed the right signals?
I think we have. Especially with China, there is a level of nuclear stability. Even in the height of crisis like Doklam, which lasted a good 74 days, there was no talk about nuclear weapons. And that gives you a sense of nuclear stability with China. With Pakistan, the problem is that Pakistan uses the weapon politically in order to carry out acts of terrorism. And that leads to, doubts in people's mind in India about, is our strategy good because we are not able to stop terrorism? Now, terrorism can never be stopped by suggesting nuclear weapons use against terrorism. That's a very low-cost, strategy that Pakistan has, and it makes eminent sense in their mind to continue to bleed India through the use of terrorism. We have to find answers for terrorism, not in the nuclear weapons use, but in other dimensions. And I think India has demonstrated good use of military instruments. We've been using, political shaming, diplomatic isolation, economic strangulation for a long period of time. They've had their limited benefits. But the use of military instruments like surgical strikes, air strikes on terrorist infrastructure, this has been done relatively recently. And I think that will have an impact because then you're actually punishing the hand which is feeding the terrorism. And you're trying to do that. So it'll also raise our own faith in our nuclear deterrence doctrine, because the general tendency is to look for answers there. And because, you've mentioned NFU several times, the tendency is to believe that India is a pacifist country, India is a passive country, it doesn't take proactive action, and therefore your nuclear weapon is bad because it's suggesting NFU. But there's a military logic of NFU that has to be understood by the military and by the common man in order to have that faith in NFU. And your answers to terrorism and Pakistan's use of its own nuclear weapons to shield terrorism have to be found in different instruments.
So last question. When you step back and look at the nuclear scenario, and it seems to be pretty much crumbling and all that, are there any moves being made to try and get back to some kind of an equilibrium worldwide?
I don't see very many actions happening at the global level currently. So in the short term, I think we are looking at this crumbling scenario. The US is unhappy to be in an arms control only with Russia when China threat has come up to the level it has. So they would be looking for new instruments of arms control where China is also brought into the picture. But China is playing very difficult right now, and they've said that we are not interested in any arms control for the moment. In fact, they've always said our arsenal is so small that we can't do. So my sense now is that arms control will not be of the kinds that we've seen in the past. So it will not be about numbers. It will not be about setting ceilings on certain kinds of, delivery systems. It will be more political, even including statements. You would remember Presidents Reagan and Gorbachev making that important statement about nuclear war cannot be won and should not be fought. That has gone away, and there is a certain casualness in the way we are looking at nuclear weapons today. President Trump, when he says, what are nuclear weapons for if not for use, it's a completely different philosophy that is coming into the picture. So arms control will be largely about risk reduction. It will be about bilateral political statements to bring down the temperatures. For India, the best kind of arms control would actually be a universal NFU, because if that was to happen, it would devalue the weapon over a period of time. If nobody can use it, why have that weapon? And then you can move towards disarmament. So in the short term, I think we are in for a turbulent phase where technologies are growing. There's no shared sense of risks right now. But perhaps wise political leaders or an adverse nuclear trigger of some kind, an incident happening somewhere, will perhaps put us back on the path. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 is what brought arms control into the picture. So perhaps some incident of that kind, if not the wisdom of the leaders, will get us to move towards arms control. In the long term, that's the only answer we have.
Manpreet Sethi, pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure being here.